This is the next in the Patriot Minute series. I'm Grandpa Rick. I want to talk about the Angel in the White House, another one of the 100 heroes we're going to be covering here at the Legacy Generation. This is a story of the White House in one of its darkest hours. It was the winter of 1862. The battle has been going on in the Civil War for about a year, and the North was losing. And as we find, if you go through the manuals, Family Freedom Manual series, volumes 1 and 2, in this case, particularly volume 3, and there's volume 4, you will hear the story of the day that an angel arrived at the White House. Again, these are stories you don't hear them in the universities or the schools anymore. They were once taught, but not anymore. President Lincoln was struggling. In fact, he felt that he was on his way out. Even though he had only been in office a little over a year as president, typhoid fever, the water was bad in Washington, had infected the White House, and his family was sick. His two sons, Tad and little Willie. Willie was very close to that little boy. He spent a lot of time with him, loved him. And of course, he did his whole family. But Willie got typhoid. He got sick very, very quickly and seemed to be slipping. The president was so busy with the war and all the work trying to hold the nation together. Mary Lincoln began to blame him for not spending more time with his boys. And of course, Lincoln was wanting to, but was not able to. Anyway, a day came, winter 1862, Willie died. And William Wallace Lincoln, he died. And Mary Lincoln collapsed from the emotional stress. She ended up in bed. Tad was still sick with typhoid and it looked like he wasn't going to make it either. Lincoln was at the end of his rope, really. And they were taking bets among his cabinet and others to when he would finally collapse and would not be able to be president anymore. Of course, there were many around him who thought that they could be a better president than he could be. Anyway, the Army thought, one of the heads of the medical division said, we need to get a nurse in the White House to help at this point. It's a very difficult period. So a woman showed up one day. Her name was Rebecca Pomeroy, a fascinating woman. She had lost most of her family to disease. As I said, the water was bad in the area of Washington, and typhoid fever was common at certain times of the year. She also her husband had died, her mother had just died. All she had left was her oldest son, who was, I believe, about 18, and he was fighting on the front lines for the Union. And of course, in these terrible battles, there would be thousands of casualties with every battle. And she expected to hear any day that her son was gone. But she came into the White House, and everything she touched got better. She was a breath of fresh air and sunshine everywhere. And pretty soon, little Tad, the son that had survived, began to improve. And soon he was up and about. She got Mary Lincoln out of bed and up and about. And one day, President Lincoln came to Rebecca and said, "Madam, I have to know. Everything you touch gets better. Everything you do seems to brighten. Everything in the White House is better now since you've arrived. You've got to tell me what your secret is and how you're able to do this." And she said, "Mr. President, I'll tell you. I met God." And then she proceeded to tell President Lincoln about her experience of going to church one day and receiving a spiritual experience that she could not deny. She realized the nation was being torn apart by this horrible war, and this was not a time for her to be feeling sorry for herself. And certainly if anyone had the right to feel sorry, it would be her. But no, she said, "No, I need to help." So she had a lot of nursing experience, so she went to work in the military hospitals in the Washington, D.C. area. Now she was in the White House, and she said, "This is my motivation, sir." And Lincoln said, "This is fascinating. I want you to tell me more." So he would meet with Mary Lincoln and Rebecca, and they would pull out their Bibles, and they would talk about scriptures. And things started getting better. Lincoln realized, after studying the scriptures, Lincoln had never really been that religious. He'd not been a church-going man, but he had felt that there's something there. And then he realized, as he studied the scriptures with Rebecca Pomeroy, he said one day, he says, "I realized why this nation is being punished so in this terrible war. We are being punished," he said, "because of the sin of slavery, both North and South. And this is something that has to end." And he determined, "I know what I need to do." He says, "I am going to free the slaves. And we have a legal way of doing that, free the slaves in the southern states because they're at war with the Union. We can do that legally. And his cabinet just about went ballistic. They said, sir, you can't do that. If you do that, the border states will join the South, and the South will fight even harder. They figured that you're gonna get the slaves to rise up again. No, he says, sir, you can't do that. Well, Seward, the Secretary of State Seward, was probably Lincoln's closest friend in the cabinet, he pulled the president aside and he said, look, sir, you can't do that. I know you want to do this. And the president says, I know. He says, I know none of the cabinet wants me to, but I'm listening to a higher authority on this. And so Secretary Seward said, well, look, sir, you have to wait until we have a Union victory. When we get a victory, we can do this. But if we don't, it's just going to look like we're coming from a position of weakness. Like we're grasping at straws, trying to somehow save this war that's going in the wrong direction for us. Got to wait for a victory. Well, that victory came in September of 1862. The Southern Army crossed into Northern Territory with a secret plan to split into parts and then move quickly through the Maryland countryside and then converge in one army attacking the capital in Washington, D.C., capturing the president and ending the war, winning the war. And as the South began to prepare for that attack, these secret orders, in a miraculous way, were discovered by Northern Union forces, and that information given to McClellan. So he finally got the gumption to get his army moving, and he attacked Robert E. Lee's army there at a little unknown creek known as Antietam. Bloody battle, bloodiest single day in the history of American military history. And then the South was beaten, was driven back. They pulled back across into Southern Territory. Lincoln had his victory, so he issued his Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves. Now, I've had people tell me that history is made by great events. History is made by great cataclysmic events of weather or earthquakes or tsunamis, and certainly those events have an impact. It can have a great impact. But the real history, the true history of this world, of humankind, I believe, is made by the individuals, by individual choices that people make in their lives. They can be tiny, small choices sometimes that set people in the right direction and to be able to accomplish great things, miraculous things. And the history of this country is no different. Rebecca Pomeroy came into the White House. Very few Americans even know who she is. She made a difference in the history of our country. And some may think that she actually had a hand in saving this country at a very critical time. This is one of the stories of the 100 heroes, and it's contained in these manuals. And if you want to read more, you can certainly get them. They're available on Amazon, of course, and you can order them from our website. But I appreciate your time and your interest. There's more to come. I'm Grandpa Rick.